There is a leadership gap in financial services contact centers that almost nobody talks about directly. And it's costing talented managers years of their careers. Today I'm going to name it, explain it, and give you a practical framework for closing it. And I want to be clear up front, this is not about working harder. You've already been working hard. This is about working differently, thinking differently, and communicating differently. Those three shifts are the difference between a manager who tops out and a director who rises. So stick with me for the next 15 minutes or so, because by the end, you're going to see your own career with a clarity you probably haven't had before. Here's the problem, as I see it. The pattern I've watched play out repeatedly. And if you're in this seat, you may have lived it yourself. A high-performing manager, someone whose team consistently hits their numbers, who has strong relationships with both their agents and their leadership, who clearly has the capability to do more, gets passed over for a director role again. Maybe it's an internal posting. Maybe someone was brought in from the outside. Maybe there was a reorganization and the new structure just didn't include a spot for them. Whatever the mechanism, the result is the same. A talented person is left wondering what they're missing. And the feedback they get, if any at all, is vague. We need someone with more strategic vision. We're looking for executive presence. We want someone who can operate at a higher level. What does that actually mean? In practical terms, in a financial services contact center context, what does operating at a higher level look like? Because here's the thing about vague feedback. It's not always delivered with bad intent. Sometimes the people giving it genuinely don't know how to articulate what they are seeing, or in most cases, not seeing. They experience the gap, but they can't name it. So let me take the time to name it for you. It comes down to three things: vocabulary, frameworks, and communication altitude. I'm going to spend the bulk of this time breaking down each one of those. Not at a surface level, but deep enough that you can actually do something with it when you walk away. But before I do that, I want to spend a few moments on why this gap exists in the first place. Because understanding the root cause changes how you approach closing it. So why does this gap exist? Most contact center managers were promoted because they were exceptional individual contributors first. They handled escalations well. Members loved them. They coached their peers naturally, and at some point, someone recognized their potential and moved them into management. That promotion was earned, but here's the problem. The skills that made you a great agent and even a great team lead or assistant manager or manager are not the same skills that get you to director. And the path between manager and director has very few formal on-ramps. There is no standard curriculum. There is no certification that says you now think like a director. Most organizations don't have a structured pipeline between those two levels. They just wait for someone to show up already operating there and then give them the title. Which means the managers who make it to director are often the ones who figured it out on their own, through mentorship, through exposure, through being in the right rooms at the right times. But the pathway isn't equally available to everyone, at least not that pathway. In the financial services industry specifically, there's an added layer. credit unions, and community banks have their own language, their own regulatory environment, their own philosophical DNA. The cooperative model isn't just a business structure, it's a worldview. And if you don't understand it deeply, you will never fully connect your operational work to the mission of the organization. So the gap is real. It's structural, and it's not your fault that it exists. But closing it, that part is on you. So let's talk about how. Gap 1 is vocabulary. Every level of leadership has its own language. And when you use the wrong language or the wrong vocabulary in the wrong room, it signals to the people in that room where you belong in the hierarchy. Not because they're being elitist, but because language is a proxy for how you think. Let me give you some specific examples from the contact center world. Managers talk about satisfaction scores. Directors talk about member effort. Those are not the same thing. Satisfaction tells you about how someone felt after an interaction. Effort tells you how hard they had to work to get their problem solved. Effort is predictive. Effort tells you about the design of your service experience, not just the execution of it. When you walk into a leadership meeting and you talk about reducing member effort as a strategic priority, you are signaling systems level thinking, and that is a director signal. Managers talk about headcount. Directors talk about cost per contact. Headcount is a number on a roster, but cost per contact is a metric that connects your operation to the income statement. It accounts for handle time, staffing efficiency, channel mix, and it gives a CFO a reason to stay in the conversation with you. When you can walk into a budget discussion and say, our cost per contact in chat is 40% lower than voice, and here's how we can shift volume, you are speaking the language of someone who not only understands the business, not just as a function. Here's another one. Managers reference their QA scores and their CSAT reports. Directors reference the NCUA call report. If you're in a credit union and you've never opened the NCUA call report and connected what's in there to your contact center and to what it does every day, that's a gap. Directors at credit unions understand that member-facing operations have a direct relationship to asset growth, loan-to-share ratios, and delinquency rates. Your team's performance on collections calls is in that report. Your team's ability to cross-serve loan products moves those numbers. When you speak that language, you are no longer just a contact center manager. You are a business leader who happens to run a contact center. So the vocabulary work is this. Spend the next 30 days listening differently in every meeting you're in. Notice the words your vice president uses that you don't. Notice what language shows up in presentations. Start building your own glossary. I'll give you a starting point in the framework I'm going to walk you through. But the habit of vocabulary acquisition has to be yours. Gap 2 is frameworks. A framework is what separates a reaction from a strategy. And this gap is the one I see most clearly when I'm watching a manager perform under pressure. Here's what I mean. Something goes wrong in your operation. Maybe your abandonment rate spikes. Maybe you have a QA failure on a high-profile member interaction. Maybe an escalation gets to your VP that should have been resolved at the frontline agent level. A manager's natural instinct, and it's a good instinct, is to fix the problem. Coach the agent, update the process, add a step to the checklist, move on. That is competent management. But a director looks at the same situation and asks a different set of questions. Not, how do I fix this? But what does this event tell me about my system? Why did the abandonment rate spike? Was it a staffing alignment issue? A demand pattern we didn't anticipate? Or a routing configuration that broke under volume? Why did that escalation reach my VP? Is this a training gap, a policy gap, or an empowerment gap? What does the fact that this happened tell me about what I need to redesign? That is a framework. It's a different way of seeing the same event. So let me give you a second example, because I think this one is really concrete. Workforce management. A manager who is good at workforce management fills the schedule and manages adherence. A director who understands workforce management as a framework is asking, what is the relationship between our forecasting accuracy and our member experience outcomes? How does our interval level staffing connect to our speed of answer? What happens to member effort when we are understaffed by even 10% during peak windows? And how do I make the case to finance when they want to cut our FTEs? That is a framework. It's not just knowing the tools, it's understanding the causal chain between your operational inputs and your member experience outputs. One more. Performance management. A manager manages individual performance, coaches agents, issues corrective action when needed, reviews scorecards. All of that is correct and necessary. But a director builds the performance infrastructure. They ask the question, what does our performance architecture tell us about what we value? Are our metrics leading or lagging? Are we measuring the things that actually drive member experience? Or are we measuring the things that are easy to count? Do our supervisors have the tools, the training, and the time to coach effectively? Or have we built a system that makes performance management a checkbox? Frameworks are learnable, but learning them requires you to deliberately step back from the operational noise long enough to look at your work from a systems level. And that is a discipline. It's absolutely something that you can practice. Gap 3 is communication altitude. And this is one that shows up most visibly in real time. Every leadership level has an appropriate altitude at which to communicate. And when you get it wrong, when you bring agent level detail into a VP conversation, or when you speak in abstractions to your frontline team, you lose your audience. And in a leadership context, losing your audience has consequences. Let me walk you through the altitude ladder. As an agent, communication happens at the transaction level. Handle this call. Resolve this member's problem. Follow this process. A team lead communicates at the team level. Here's how we're performing this week. Here's what we're focusing on. Here's how you fit into that plan. A manager communicates at the operations level. Here's what's happening across my team. Here's how we're trending against our targets. Here are the issues I'm managing and what I'm doing about them. A director communicates at the strategic level. Here's what our operational performance tells us about the member experience we are delivering. Here's where we have risk. Here's where we have opportunity. Here's how I'm positioning the organization to win over the next 12 months. Now, and this is important, a director still knows the transaction level. They still know what's happening on the floor, but they translate that knowledge upward. They don't bring the floor into the boardroom, they bring the insight that the floor generates. Practically, this means when you're preparing for an executive conversation, you need to ask yourself, what is the one thing this person needs to understand? Not the 10 things that you know, not the context that got you here, the one thing. And then you need to connect that one thing to what they care about, which is member growth, financial health, regulatory safety, or organizational risk. If you can do that, if you can walk into a room with your CFO and tell a clear, connected, altitude-appropriate story about your operation, you look like a director, even before you have the title. So let's talk about how to actually close these gaps in a structured way. Because I don't want this to just be a diagnosis. I want you to leave with a path. I built the Director Ready framework specifically for financial services contact center leaders who are ready to operate at that next level. It's 8 modules, and I'm going to walk you through each one so you understand what it covers and why it's in there. Module 1, or the cooperative model, is foundational, and it's often skipped. Credit unions are not banks. They're member-owned financial cooperatives governed by volunteers who are elected by the membership. Understanding that structure, how decisions get made, how the board relates to the CEO, how the mission of people, helping people, is supposed to show up in operational decisions. This is the lens through which every other module should be read. If you can't speak to the cooperative model fluently, you will always feel like an outsider in senior leadership conversation. Module 2, regulatory fluency. Whether it's NCUA, BSA, CFPB, fair lending, member complaint management, these aren't just compliance department concerns. They show up in your contact center every day. A director-level leader understands the regulatory environment well enough to assess risk in real time and to speak credibly with their compliance and risk partners. Module 3, metrics that matter. We covered some of this in the vocabulary section, but this module goes deeper. It covers the full metrics architecture of a high-performing contact center, from handle time and adherence all the way to cost per contact, first contact resolution, member effort score, net promoter score, and how to connect each metric to a business outcome. Module 4, workforce management at the strategic level. Not how to use your workforce management software, but how to think about the workforce strategy, the forecasting philosophy, the relationship between staffing decisions and member experience, how to make a business case for headcount, and how to defend it. Module 5, technology and channel strategy. Your contact center technology stack is not just an IT conversation. IVR design, digital deflection strategy, chat implementation, AI-assisted routing. These are member experience decisions. A director-level leader needs to be able to evaluate technology through the lens of member effort and operational efficiency simultaneously. Module 6, member experience strategy. This is where voice of the member data, complaint analysis, and journey mapping come together to help you ask the question, how do you translate what members are telling you through their words, their behaviors, and their decisions into operational priorities? This module teaches you to build a member experience strategy, not just respond to member feedback. Module 7, financial acumen for contact center leaders. Budget management, cost center versus profit center thinking. How to read a profit and loss statement and connect it to your operation. How to build a business case that survives a finance review. This module is often the one people tell me they wish they had years earlier. And finally, Module 8, executive communication. This is the altitude work we talked about, but in practice. How to structure an executive briefing, how to present data to a board, how to deliver bad news upward in a way that demonstrates leadership rather than anxiety, how to build credibility in the rooms where you're the most junior person present. These 8 modules are designed to give you the vocabulary, the frameworks, and the altitude to operate like a director before you have the title. Because here's the truth. I want you to sit with. Organizations do not typically promote people to a level they've never been seen operating at. The title catches up to the behavior, which means your job right now, if the director seat is where you're headed, is to start behaving like a director in the role you're already in. I want to be specific about who this framework is designed for, because I think clarity here matters. This is for you if you are a contact center manager or senior manager in financial services or credit union environment who knows you're ready for more, but you haven't been able to articulate what more actually requires. This is for you if you've been told you need more strategic vision without anyone ever explaining what that means in your specific context. This is for you if you're sharp operationally, your metrics are solid, your team trusts you, your director or your managers rely on you, but you sense that something is missing in how you show up in senior level conversations. This is not a beginner resource. This is not for someone in their first year of management. This is for the person who has already proven themselves at the manager level and is now serious about making the jump. If that's you, keep watching. Download the framework and put it into work. This gap is closable. I've seen it happen, and I've been part of making it happen. The free download of the Director Ready framework is in the description. No opt-in, just the resource. Take it, use it, share it with someone you think needs it. And if you found value in this, subscribe. I post every week on credit union and financial services contact center leadership, strategy, operations, career development. If this is your world, then this channel is built for you.